Hello, my friends. My name is Ryan Freeman, and thank you for coming to my book review of William Faulkner's The Unvanquished. For those of you who have never heard of William Faulkner, he was a Southern writer, born in 1897, died in the 1960s, fallen off of a horse, and then I think eventually getting a heart attack not long after that. He has won the Pulitzer Prize twice, the National Book Award twice, as well as the Nobel Prize in Literature. So he is a very celebrated American author. He has been considered for a very long time to be one of America's greatest writers of the 20th century, and by many also as perhaps the greatest writer to come from the South. William Faulkner comes from very influential Southern families, particularly in Mississippi, where he was raised. And as a little boy, he heard a lot of stories about his family and the Civil War and slavery and the Ku Klux Klan. And he was named after his great-grandfather. And one of the main characters, which is a Confederate soldier who has a son, and it's actually mostly about this soldier's son, but the soldier was largely based off of William Faulkner's great-grandfather, and William Faulkner was named after this guy and had heard so many stories about him and legends. So a lot of this book, The Unvanquished, which takes place towards the end of the Civil War as the Union soldiers start to drive in to Mississippi. So the South is losing the war, and it soon becomes evident. And in this short story, 192 pages, not very long, very quick read, very fast moving, very interesting. And it has this realism that I have never felt, particularly for the South. Part of this realism comes from the fact that William Faulkner not only is a great writer, but was steeped in the lore and the stories of people who took part in the Civil War and the stories that they passed on to their kin, and his knowledge of the land. Sorry, I'm at a park, by the way, if it's really loud. There's geese and helicopters and planes and all of that. In any case, I wanted to share that I really like this book. And if you're someone who likes very great fiction, and you're interested in war and its effect on people, sort of the privation, as there's not a lot of food, and there's soldiers who may burn your house down, and families being split apart, the emotional turmoil, and then of course with the Civil War in the South, the whole effects of slavery, both when the slaves were owned by their masters and then eventually freed, how that's affect not only on the slaves themselves, but the white folk as well. And I should say that Faulkner uses the N-word prodigiously. So you are constantly reading the N-word throughout this novel. Not in a funny sense, not in an always, of course it's a derogatory word, so anytime you use the N-word, it is derogatory. But the N-word is being used by black people, used by white people, and the reason it didn't bother me was that it lent an authenticity. I believe that's probably how people talked. And I saw that, although I'm glad that the N-word is not used so frequently today, it was interesting to see how black people thought of other black people, how white people thought of other black people, and in terms of the weapons, there's an authenticity to the weapons that are described, their use of horses, the chaos and confusion between the skirmishes and the rising tide and fall of the Union soldiers, the destructions of the railroads. I'm trying not to spoil anything just in case you do want to read it. Like I said, only 192 pages, very thin, fast-moving, very interesting. I guess to our modern sensibilities, just going back to that N-word, sometimes we might be just turned off because, we all know that so much so much evil has come from the use of that word. However, if you can accept it as just being part of the experience of what it would have been like to live in those days. And I should also say that black people were mistreated in history and in this novel, but they were also well treated, probably in history and in this novel. This novel is not 100% historically accurate, although it is pretty close. But the experience of being there at that time, under those conditions, under the constraints of constant bloodshed, losing family members, not being able to find each other, trying to scrap enough food and money to live, and then burying your family members, and dealing with runaway slaves and slaves, and all of the things. Some reviewers have said that it's so powerfully real in terms of the experience, even if some of the dates might not be 100% historically accurate. I highly recommend William Faulkner's The Unvanquished. As I said, William Faulkner is a fantastic author. He's left a great legacy and has influenced authors from around the world, particularly in Latin America and France. And when you read him, now I'm gonna add a little caveat. I have tried to read a couple of his other books, and I found it very difficult to get into them. I've read some of his short stories, which I love very much. But this was the first novel of William Faulkner that I finished, and so I'm going to go back to those other novels where I had problems with and try to give it a try. Some of the cadence of the way he writes is unlike a lot of other authors, and I can't just read it 100% literally and grammatically how I'm used to the way that other authors write their sentences. It's sort of got this weird feeling and rhythm to it, and when you immerse yourself in Faulkner's language, it feels like just this really amazing, pulsating experience of what's happening, almost like poetry, where you sometimes don't exactly know what you're reading, but the feeling that it evokes within you is the reason that you keep reading it. And of course, you can go back and try to dissect it, but it is a story of people dealing with life in the Civil War, particularly this colonel, this soldier that I talked about, based on William Faulkner's great-grandfather, who he was named after. The story is predominantly about this colonel's son as he grows up from the age of 12 until he's in his 20s, and he's having to avenge deaths, people who have killed his family. He has to... it's just a unwritten law that if you kill someone in my family, well, guess what? I'm going to go kill you. Sort of that old tribal law of, eye for an eye. And he also, this kid's moral instruction, biblical instruction, anytime any of the children or young adults says a bad word, the old granny is yelling, "Get the soap," and they're putting soap in their mouth. And that reminded me of when I was a child. And one of the reasons, although I do use curse words today, not that often, but sometimes I do. When I was a little kid, out of all of the kids at my school, I was the least likely to say a swear word, because my mom, who also raised me in a very Christian upbringing, like the characters here and most of the people in the South, anytime I said a bad word, even a not so bad word, my mom put a bar of soap in my mouth. And so I kind of appreciated that every time the granny said, "Get the soap," because it works. It doesn't always work, but it does work. So sort of the moral instruction, the unwritten clannish, tribal laws that permeated there, the honor of defending your land, even when your side is obviously losing, finding hope when the situation looks hopeless. In fact, I read in the foreword that William Faulkner visited Japan not long after Japan lost the Second World War, and one of his speeches to the Japanese, particularly to these young people, is that he wrote this novel and perhaps some of his other works, but at least this novel to talk about when your army, when your side, when your cause loses, sometimes young people find it difficult to find hope. What can we lean on? What can we stand on? It's so easy to be dispirited when you suffer a great loss. But Faulkner points out that the human spirit is able to withstand any sort of tragedy, any sort of despair, if a man and a woman is willing to have that courage to be a strong human, to be a strong man, and to bear it. And there is some compensating power within us that allows us to go through these troubling times and come out through them stronger than before. So even though you don't want to lose a war, you don't want to lose a battle, you don't want to go to despair, you don't want to suffer these losses, that you have it within you to do so, and not only do so, but to become more powerful and a stronger and more courageous person from it. So that's largely what this novel is about, and a lot of funniness, a lot of tragedy. I cried a little bit, laughed a lot, all of the above, just like life. So if you are in the mood for a short story that takes place in the South, written by who many people consider to be the greatest writer of fiction from the South, it takes place at the end of the Civil War, down in Mississippi, some other places as well. It's a fantastic novel, fantastic story, written by one of America's greatest authors. I highly recommend it if you want any of that. My name is Ryan Freeman. Thank you for watching my book review. Bye-bye.